like, cause with Japanese, it's like, it took me like 5 years to get to the point where I really felt comfortable. Like, to the point where, take any book off the shelf, understand it, have whatever conversation I wanted. And that was dedicating my entire life to it. So when I saw like, oh, I'm spending like 1-2 hours a day on Chinese, like, I'm never going to get anywhere.
Yo, welcome back to the Koregara podcast. This is part 2 of our conversation with Matt, the man behind the Matt vs. Japan YouTube channel and co-founder of the Mass Immersion Approach. If you haven't already, make sure to go back and listen to part 1 of our conversation, as we pick up right where we left off. Also, if this is your first time listening to the Koregara podcast, my name is Eric, and I'm joined by my co-host Raza. And on our show, we talk about our experiences living in Japan, and we interview foreigners and Japanese people who have lived or are living there in Japan. In our discussion with Matt vs. Japan, we talk a lot about his identity as Matt vs. Japan, his ambitions for the Mass Immersion Approach, and his future outlook for where he wants to take things. If you like the podcast so far, we would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe, as it would really help us in making more content. Thank you so much, and hope you guys enjoy the podcast.
Yes, you also talked a lot about your personal struggles as well as your personal growth in terms of your identity, right? So would you say at this point right now, do you feel content with yourself and your identity?
Well, much more content than I was, like last year, and then last year I was more content than I was the previous year. So it's still a work in progress. Like, I definitely think I have, still have a lot to go. But yeah, I'd say it's like a night and day difference compared to like where I was when I made that 3-hour video.
Yeah, and I don't know, like personally, the idea of, I guess when I was in Japan too, like I came in not knowing anything. I was just like that guy. I was like, oh shit, like what the fuck have I gotten myself into? But I feel like having, I guess, all those times where you're being put down so hard, I guess it really gives you that flip side opportunity to grow as well.
Yeah. Like now I totally believe that you kind of have to put yourself in situations where you're going to struggle in order to really grow. Like, you have to get out of your comfort zone, for sure.
Yeah, and now, like, we talked a lot about Japanese and how MIA is really, it's seen, I guess, to the general public as for Japanese, but MIA can be used for any language, right?
Yeah.
So how have you been, because I know you've been doing Chinese, so, and maybe other languages as well. So I was wondering, how has that been going in terms of how do you like seeing MIA like personally being used in terms of other languages? Yeah,
well, actually, in the past couple months, a lot of like MIA side communities have kind of popped up. Like, there's a community of people learning Korean with MIA, and they have their own. They kind of like, someone made a subreddit, and they have their own Discord community. And I'm in there, but someone else basically runs it. And there's also kind of like, I've seen, there's a kind of like another community of people using it for Spanish. And recently I just found one for Mandarin too. And so it's kind of interesting to see that it's almost like, in a sense, a sort of decentralization. I mean, I definitely don't want it to become completely decentralized, because I still want to be at the center of this thing. But what I'm kind of realizing now is that, like, that's actually the best for MIA's growth, because it's like, if we allow other members who are just passionate about it to go and, create their own side communities and things like that, and like actually like start iterating on like, okay, well, what happens when you apply MI to Korean? Like, what changes? Like, what tweaks are going to be effective? What decks are effective? What grammar guide is effective? Like, they're kind of figuring that stuff out for us. And so, like, when the time comes where we're more ready to be like, okay, now we're going to like put some content for Korean specifically on the site, we can go to that community and be like, okay, what did you guys like? What's your current consensus? Out of like, okay, maybe 50 of you guys have like reached a, pretty high level of Korean through MI. Like, what did you guys learn? And then we'll be able to just deliver that to everyone else through our platform. So I think it's really cool to see how, in a way, it's really not just us that's part of this. It is kind of like a movement, and everyone is able to play a role. There's a lot of other people in the community too that are like making little tools that help. Like, when a couple months ago, I put out a condensed audio video where, basically you can, you guys can link the video. I won't spend too much time going into it. Basically, it's the idea of you can take the audio file for a TV show that you watched and then remove all the parts of the audio file where no one's talking, so that you can have like basically you can just get more language per hour, more listening practice per hour by listening to this condensed form with all the blank air taken out. And we made a very rudimentary tool in order to create these condensed audio files. And after we put the idea out there, like 4 or 5 other people created like a better tool that can help you use it, that like made it easier to do and made you easier to do it in bulk and fix some of the potential issues. And so it's kind of cool to see that like there's a lot of people, programmers in the community and things like that. And so, yeah, I feel like it's kind of like this bigger movement.
And I guess we can move more towards the community aspect then, because in the beginning it was really just you, right? Just with MIA, it was kind of is more like centralized to you, and now you have all this outpouring support going all the way through. What is one thing been that's kind of like really like made you feel warm inside, like wow, like these people are doing this like not just for me, but just for this move?
Yeah, I mean, I get tons of comments. Like people will just DM me saying like, "Hey Matt, I just wanted to say like your content completely changed my life. Like before I was doing traditional methods and didn't have any success, and I started doing MIA, and now like 6 months later I've made more progress than I made in years." And like, or like people being like, "Yeah, I used MIA to like reach this level, and then I got a job because of it," and like get all these messages like that. And so that's really cool. But also like on Twitter, when I see basically like people like when a bigger someone with a bigger following, like let's say PewDiePie or something, I think of PewDiePie's trying to learn Japanese, and I don't think PewDiePie has like seen MIA yet, but though people who are like will go into his like his like chats and at him on Twitter, be like, "God, no, PewDiePie, you gotta check out Matt vs. Japan, gotta check out MIA." So like when I see other people like trying to get like trying to basically recruit just because there's nothing in it for them, right? Besides that they just believe in it and they just want to, you know, share what they believe in. So like seeing that like people feel strongly enough about it where they're going to just go and like go out of their way to try to spread it. I think that is like, to me, a sign that like we're doing something right. Cause that's like it's kind of like the ultimate sign that, you know, you're doing something right. If like people are just feeling like they want to go and spread your content and things like that. So that definitely is really cool.
Do you feel like MIA, as you're working on it right now, has a complete estate? Like maybe all the stages and all the principles and techniques that you want to put out there?
No, not even close. It feels like we only got like 1%. Like, like we're changing it all the time. And I mean, I've learned so much through interacting with the community. I kind of just recently, we kind of created a whole new version of the outline of MIA, where before there was 5 stages of going from like complete beginner to like near native level, where now there's 4 stages, but each stage has like part 1 and part 2. And it's a lot more streamlined. Within a couple of weeks, it should be like on the website. We're going to like kind of restructure the website, but it's way more streamlined. It's way easier to understand. It's way easier to like apply to your own situation. And I never would have been able to make that without like basically putting out the old overview and then seeing how it plays out in reality, seeing like what are the problems with it, you know, what parts are not clear to people, what are the things that people want but they're not getting. And also just with like techniques and seeing like, okay, I'll see comments saying of like asking the same questions or like reporting the same struggles, and that will tell me like, oh, so this is something that people struggle with. Whereas there's no way for me to predict ahead of time what people are gonna like be stuck on and things like that. So it's definitely an iterative process where it's like I got to put out content, see how people respond to it, you know, see what people report, and then go and change that. And then other people will have good ideas that I'll, you know, take in as well. So it's very much kind of like this back and forth process where I feel like this next version of the site is going to be a big upgrade, but I'm sure that we're going to keep improving it over time. And especially with like, different, like basically when I first started creating my YouTube channel, my mindset was that like immersion learning is a very hardcore thing. And if you're not willing to basically dedicate your whole life to it, then you're never really going to succeed. And what I'm realizing now is that like actually if you make the method good enough, then it's going to be possible for people to have success, even if they also have a job and maybe a family and then like only have a couple hours a day. I mean, especially if you're talking about like a European language, it's still going to be like, if you're really trying to learn Japanese or Chinese and you only have a couple hours a day, it's still going to be difficult. But I'm seeing now that like there's like, I always thought that the immersion approach was hardcore by nature, but I'm realizing it doesn't have to be. I mean, of course, I think there's something to be said for going hardcore. And for people in certain situations, I definitely encourage it. And I think it's the best way to get good quickly. But most people are not in a position to get hardcore. And what I'm realizing now is like, oh, I actually see the potential to create a method where like the average person could actually implement it. And like, basically some of like the changes now that like, I mean, if myself from 3 years ago heard these, I would be like, no, you're watering it down. But what I'm seeing now is like, well, in a sense, I'm watering it down, but I'm also making it accessible to the average person. Like, what I'm going to tell people to do now is like, for the beginning part of the process, like when you very first start a new language, like watch content in that language with English subtitles, and then on the side, like memorize with Anki or SRS, like memorize the most common, like 1,500 or 2,000 words, and like read through a grammar guide. And before I would have said like, oh, don't watch with English subtitles because you're not going to learn very much. Like just watch raw and train your listening. But the thing is, when you first start a new language, you don't understand anything, and you sit down and try to like actively watch a TV show where you understand nothing. Like that is really difficult. It's like not very fun. It's pretty fucking tedious. Even for me, like when I was trying to, like I did it when I was learning Japanese because I was just so motivated and so passionate. But like even when I try to do that with Chinese, it's like, it's not a fun experience. So what I'm realizing now is like, well, just pragmatically watch with English subtitles, and then through that, you can at least develop a habit of spending time with your target language, because I think a lot of people have an English addiction, and that's the first barrier they encounter. So at least you can help break that English addiction. You can start discovering what types of content you like in your target language, build up that habit of setting aside time every day. And then also you can use that content that you watch with English subtitles as passive immersion, and it will be more comprehensible because you'll have watched it once with the subtitles, and that can still help you get your ears used to the sounds of the language. And so it's like, if we're talking about, okay, the first stage of the process is like spend a half hour to an hour a day watching like a TV show that you like with English subtitles, and then also like memorize 10, 20 words a day in Anki. Like that's something the average person can do. It's still not easy, right? That's still like 2 hours, 3 hours. And then also if we're saying, okay, try to do some passive immersion too. That's still a commitment, but it's something that is possible for a busy person who's motivated. And then over time, you can ramp up the immersion and like remove the English subtitles. And it can be a gradual process. It doesn't have to be so like cut and dry or like black and white. And so I'm seeing now like the potential of like, oh, like this, we could bring this to the masses in a sense, you know?
Yeah. And also knowing that you've been studying other languages, do you imagine using these techniques to reach a similar level that you have with Japanese? Or do you imagine just reaching like maybe say a base level of fluency?
I think like, I don't think I'll probably ever take a language as far as I took Japanese. Like basically in the new way of structuring the structuring MIA, we're going to call it the roadmap basically. So like I said, there's 4 stages. So basically the first stage is like getting to the point where you can like actually get into immersion. You know, like, okay, you're learning the most common words, or setting up your environment and things like that. It's kind of just like the prerequisites. Stage 2 is basically the beginner. You could say it very, very roughly. Stage 2 is beginner. Stage 3 is intermediate. Stage 4 is advanced. And so like by the end of stage 3, you're at basic fluency. And then stage 4 is like just taking that basic fluency and spreading it out, and there's no true end, right? So what I realize is that like the language learning process looks very different depending on whether you're in stage 2 versus stage 3 versus stage 4. Like the subjective experience is like totally different, because like in stage 2, when you're just trying to build up your initial foundation and like understanding the language, like reading and listening, like you're totally lost. You understand hardly anything. You're like feel excited when you like piece together a single sentence, at least at the beginning. And then, you know, you get to that point. Whereas like stage 3 is like, okay, now you understand a lot of stuff. You can watch shows and follow the plot. And it's kind of just that intermediate plateau kind of area where you're like, man, like there's so many words I don't know. I'm learning a ton of words, but there seems to be a never ending supply. When is this going to go away? When am I going to like get to that next level where I really like feel like I'm there? And then stage 4 is kind of where you're like, okay, I'm fluent. It's kind of like where I'm at now. It's like, I'm totally fluent. But there's still all these little things I'd want to improve, but improving them takes like a lot of grind work because I'm experiencing extreme diminishing returns. I like got to that point. And so I kind of feel like, yeah, the language learning process is totally different at each stage. And so I think that, I will probably never like go through that stage 4 process with another language besides Japanese, just because I don't think I'm ever really going to want it badly enough. because there's no language that I think I'm that passionate about. Like ultimately, I'm still most passionate about Japanese. Like I'd still rather like take my Japanese to the highest level possible than try to go and like get another language to the place where I'm at in Japanese. And the thing is like the stage 2 and stage 3, you can actually get there without a extreme level of commitment. So like, I mean, especially if you're talking about a European language, like you could probably get to a decent level in Spanish in a year with like an hour or two a day, like very minimal commitment. And so I could see myself doing that for basically like I'll probably learn a couple European languages at some point. First of all, just so that I'll have the experience of learning a European language so that I'll be able to make the MI content better. And also just because it's like, hey, it'd be cool, like go to a French like restaurant or whatever, or like you speak French to the waiter or whatever, like impress your people around you. And I think it'd be fun, like language learning is fun. And so when you're learning a European language, it's kind of, I like from what I've heard, it's kind of like you're just on easy mode. So make quick gains and it can just be genuinely a lot of fun. And, so I'm interested in like French, German, and Spanish. So, but I'm minimal interest. So it's like, I'll probably get to like stage 2, maybe like halfway through stage 3 in those, and then be like totally satisfied and be like, okay, I have no interest in like pursuing this further. And then I'm also interested in Chinese and Korean. And like, I am like kind of studying Chinese now. And, I could see myself maybe taking those further, but mainly in the area of comprehension. Because I think for me personally, like with Chinese, for example, I do have a desire to learn how to understand Chinese because I'm really fascinated how like the written language is just kanji, and in a way the spoken language is also just kanji, just without the kanji. So I mean, like after learning a little bit of Japanese or a little bit of Chinese, I see how much Chinese has been imported into Japanese. Like I experienced that more. I realized like, oh, yoji jukku go is pretty much just a little Chinese sentence, like inserted into Japanese. And there's a lot of other little things like that. So to realize like, oh, imagine if you took all those little bits of like kanji compounds and all that stuff, and then it was like a whole language that was just that. Like that idea sounds really interesting. And like when I am watching shows in Chinese and stuff and I understand, like there are times where I understand a sentence and I realize like, whoa, that's a totally different way of expressing that idea than in either Japanese or English. And it's like learning a new way of thinking. And I really like that experience of learning that new way of thinking, learning how to comprehend meaning in an entirely new way. And especially through the characters and just through like Chinese, the way it's structured is so totally different than English and Japanese. So I find that very interesting. But I don't really have a desire to be able to like speak it myself. Like my desire more revolves around gaining that understanding. Like I think if I got to the point where I could like read books in Chinese, I think I would pretty much be satisfied. Because I mean, I don't really care about talking to Chinese people that much, to be honest. Like, there's plenty of English and Japanese people I could talk to already. So, like, for me, even with Japanese too, like, I am interested in speaking Japanese, but the thing I am most interested in is just understanding it, like, being able to consume meaning and consume other humans' thoughts in a new, unique way is, like, the thing that is most rewarding and interesting to me. So,
are there things that you did, like, habits that you put in place that helped you improve in Japanese but were unable to replicate for Chinese? Like maybe because the passion wasn't as much there?
Well, I mean, in a way, there's it might seem at first glance that going really hardcore at learning a language would be the hardest thing to do. Because it's kind of like, oh, well, studying 2 hours a day is hard. Imagine studying 10 hours a day. That sounds, like 5 times as hard. But in reality, when you're going really hardcore, you're basically saying like, I'm going to like spend as much time as possible on learning this language. And everything else besides learning this language, I'm going to cut down to the bare minimum. And so in a way, this makes your life very simple because whenever you have to make a decision about how you're going to use your time, you just have to ask yourself, like, is this like, for anything that's not Japanese, you just ask yourself, can I cut this out? If the answer is yes, you cut it out. If not, you do it because you have to do it. And then if the question is ever like, should I do Japanese or something that's not Japanese, you just always choose Japanese. And so in a way, your life becomes very simple. It's kind of like how like Steve Jobs always wore the same outfit, so he never had to pick his outfit. It's like, it simplifies your life in a similar type of way as that. And also, there's this other component of like, if you never watch English YouTube videos, then you never, like, you don't even know what English YouTube videos exist. Like, you're never getting recommended YouTube videos, so the temptation doesn't even exist. Same thing with like, you're not seeing what movies are, like when I was learning Japanese, I never saw what movies were coming out. I never saw what shows were coming out, never heard of Game of Thrones, never heard of Breaking Bad, because I was living in a Japanese bubble. And so it was actually easy to do that because there was no temptations. I was literally only seeing other Japanese things. So it was very natural because I was in that environment. And I think that's the kind of idea of AJET, is you build this environment that kind of does all the heavy lifting for you. And so when I'm learning Chinese, I never had the intention of going that hard because I still wanted to do Japanese. I still wanted to work on MIA. And so it was very much like a side hobby. And so it's a totally different game because like when I was playing Japanese, I didn't have to deal with like, oh, there's a Japanese thing I want to watch and an English thing I want to watch. How do I get myself to do the Chinese thing instead? You know, that was never an issue I had to deal with. And so it's like a totally different game that you have to play of like, how do you, balance that learning this new language with all the other things in your life. And the other thing is that, like, I think one of the most discouraging things about learning Chinese for me personally was that because I had learned Japanese, I knew firsthand how long it takes to actually get decent. And what would always happen when I would start like learning Chinese is like, because I would do it for a couple months and then I would kind of drop it. And then 6 months or 2 years later, I'd do it for a couple months again and then I'd drop it. What happened every time is that the first couple weeks, it would just be like honeymoon period. Like, oh, this is so cool. Like, it's like discovering a new world, you know, just have that sense of wonder and, you know, it feels exotic and exciting. And then that kind of like, that period goes away. And then just the raw reality that like, man, at this rate, it's going to take me fucking years to get even somewhat decent. And then even then, I'm still going to mostly suck. And like, cause with Japanese, it's like, it took me like 5 years to get to the point where I really felt comfortable. Like to the point where, you know, take any book off the shelf, understand it, have whatever conversation I wanted. And that was dedicating my entire life to it. So when I saw like, oh, I'm spending like 1-2 hours a day on Chinese, like I'm never going to get anywhere. And it was that sense of discouragement that would make me drop it because it's kind of like, well, I don't have enough time to actually put in the amount of time it would take to make fast progress. And so what's the point of like just doing a little bit at a time? Plus there was also that sense of realizing like, oh, with Japanese, like even after 5 years, I'm still not really where I'd want to be. So that when that reality kind of hits you of like, oh, if you actually want to like make this language a real part of your life, then like that is such a commitment. It's like adopting a child pretty much. So then it would kind of just hit me like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready to like commit on this level. Like, I don't know if I care that much or if like I want to spend that much time on it because there's all these other things that I want to do. So then I would end up dropping it basically. And so what I've been moving more towards recently is really like, I mean, now I've really changed my mindset from like, I'm trying to learn this language to like, I'm just trying to do the activity of language learning. And the true main purpose of it is just to be engaged in the act of language learning so that I can help create MIA better and relate to my viewers better and like be writing from firsthand experience instead of memories from many years ago when I'm like creating MIA content. And so in that sense, like, yeah, I might like with Chinese feel like I'm making like snail level progress because I mean, Chinese is so hard. I feel like and like with listening in particular, Chinese is harder than Japanese. So like, I that's why I have thoughts of like, should I just start like learning German or French? Because then maybe I could actually make decent progress in an hour a day. And that would kind of have this problem solved. Ultimately, I am more interested in Chinese than in French or German. I do have that desire that I do want to know it. And also I think it's good for me to be doing the extra hard one. It's like, that's what's going to make me learn the most. And so it's been like, yeah, like learning to change my mindset to just viewing it as like, I'm not trying to get good. I'm just like, it's like trying to be more zen about it of just like chop wood, carry water. Like I'm not trying to like, I'm just going to be engaged in the act and I'm not going to think about how good I'm getting. I'm not going to think about where I'm heading. I'm just going to like be engaged in that moment. And when I do that, it's very enjoyable and entertaining. Like, especially when you watch like with the Chinese subtitles, then makes it more comprehensible and can understand some stuff. So like, yeah, I'd say it's been a totally different game than Japanese because of the way I'm approaching it. But the thing is, most of the people doing MIA are in a similar situation to me now with Chinese, rather not what I was doing when I was doing Japanese. Most people aren't able to totally dedicate themselves and they have to figure out how to balance, you know, learning a language with the rest of their life. So I feel like it's really important for me to be, you know, engaged in this and taking on this kind of task and figuring this out in a way. And I think like I want to read more books just about like how to develop habits and things like that, because I think it's going to play a big role in this kind of model of language learning.
So on the topic of going back to MIA, this is more from like a business perspective. When you're starting up a new business, it always takes twice as long as what you might think. It'll cost twice as much, and you're never the exception. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, if you might think you can set up a website in like 2 days, it might take 2 weeks, like, and so on and so forth. I was going to ask, what was one thing that took you so much longer than you initially thought when you were first starting out MIA that really blew your mind?
I mean, just like you said, everything takes way longer than you think. Like, I mean, just like little things of like whenever we release an add-on, I have to write up the guide for the add-on that we put on the site that explains all the features. And it'll always be like, oh, that should take like 2-3 days. And then it might take like 2 weeks to like actually flesh out every single feature and like make the GIFs that demonstrate, show the feature and everything. Mm-hmm. So it's like every little thing, and like, videos always take longer than I think they're going to take, and writing articles takes way longer than I think it's going to take, because you can't really rush the creative process a lot of the time, so yeah, I mean also I've never done anything like run MIA before. I mean, essentially this is like the first thing I'm doing with my life besides like learning Japanese. It's like the first, like, I haven't even worked very many part-time jobs when I was when I was younger. So it really is like kind of the first type of thing like this that I've done. So definitely been a learning process. Like I've learned so much over the past couple of years, like so many things looking back on that were like really dumb decisions. Like basically catering, like when we were making add-ons, like we catered way too much to like the 1% of people that were like super technical. And like, we're gonna, like, for example, in the MI Japanese add-on, like, basically, what the MI Japanese add-on does is it allows you to, like, paste in a Japanese sentence and then press a button and then have, like, furigana be added to that sentence and have things automatically colored for pitch accent. So, the add-on comes, like, pre-made with a card type that you can use with the add-on. That's like a sentence. It's a card type for a sentence card. But there's also this module within the add-on where you can basically customize your own card templates to function exactly how you would want. And it like took like 80% of the time working on the add-on went towards creating the module that lets you customize the card that you want. But like 90% of people just use the pre-made card type that it comes with, and they don't even know that feature exists, that you can like customize the card template. And so like most of our time went to something that only a tiny minority of people used. But at the time it felt like, no, we can't just force people to use our card type. We have to make it customizable. Like whereas now in hindsight, it's like, no, we should have just made maybe we could have 3 different card types, come with 3 different card types. They're what we think are the best card types. And if you don't like that, too bad. Learn programming and fix it yourself. Like that's what we should have done, and would have taken a fraction of the time. And then like people, like almost everyone would have been just as happy. And the add-on probably would have been easier to use because it wouldn't have been as bloated. So a lot of things we're kind of learning to like streamline things more and not like cater too much to like the tiny percentage of people that want like way too much functionality. Because most people, they just like only use the most basic feature and stuff anyway. So that's like one example of stuff that I've learned and other things like that. And so like now even like I recently got an editor who edits my videos, and you'd think that would drastically reduce the amount of time it takes to make a video. And it does, but still like working with the editor takes time. Like explaining to him what I want him to do takes time. Going through the rough draft of the video and pointing out the things they're like revisions takes time. And then still like I have to come up with the thumbnail, and I still have to like make the description and then post it on social media. It's like there's still a lot of all these steps that you don't take into account that add up to make things take longer than you'd think. So yeah, definitely still figuring out, trying to like get more efficient and more productive all the time.
Yeah, and another thing I guess about really having your own business that a lot of people don't really think about, like in the case of MIA, everyone's thinking, oh, the add-ons, like what you're actually doing with the language, but no one actually thinks about like the financials and all the accounting. So how's that process been for you, where you all of a sudden have all of this like business aspects coming at you? Because there's not just like one aspect of it. There's just so many things that go and interplay and go, I guess, work with what the main thing you're doing. And if you don't do those right, you're pretty much screwed.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely really overwhelming, and it still feels like there's so much that I need to learn that I don't know yet. And it is really hard to balance, like, learning more about, like, accounting and taxes and, like, copyright and trademark, like, while actually creating the content every week. And I think something that, like, I have personally struggled with is that, like, someone recently introduced me to this, like, distinction between, like, urgency and importance. So it's like, there's some tasks that are urgent and important, and there's some tasks that are urgent and not important, and then there's some tasks that are not urgent and not important, and there's some tasks that are urgent, or that are important but not urgent. And so, for example, like, maybe, like, learning more about how to trademark things is something that it's important, but it's not urgent, in the sense that if I don't do it this week, no immediate negative consequence is going to come about. But things like making videos do feel, like, important and urgent, because it's like, well, if I'm not putting videos out, then, like, people might remove their pledge on Patreon, or, like, forget about us, or, like, we'll move towards being irrelevant or something like that. And so basically, like, all my time ends up going towards the things that feel urgent and important. And then there's all these things that are important but not urgent that end up never getting done. And so I guess, like, what I feel like I've been trying to do more recently is, like, learn how to just set, like, no matter how many urgent and important things it feels like there are, learning to, like, learning to just set aside some time unconditionally to work on the important things that are not urgent. Otherwise they just never get done. And yeah, it's something I've been, like, working on, but still have a lot of room to improve.
I see. So I guess, talked a lot about, like, how much time all these tasks take, but, like, we kind of, like, hinted at this aspect of scheduling. So how has that been for you? Because scheduling is, like, a whole different beast in and of itself, because it's one thing to actually make the schedule, but then following through with it is, like, a whole nother thing, especially when not only are you running a YouTube channel, but you're running a whole separate business behind that as well. So how have you kind of taken that on in terms of balancing all of these together and making the most of it?
I mean, to be honest, I still feel like I kind of suck in that area, and I'm still, like, very much just figuring it out. So I kind of be like, ask me in 2 years how I figured it out once I figured it out. Because I'm very much just still in, like, the trial and error and, like, feeling like I'm constantly, like, failing type of mode. I mean, I'm definitely making progress, but, like, the thing that I have expertise in is, like, learning a language to a high, like, learning Japanese to a high level. Everything else, I'm, like, the total noob in, essentially, and I'm, like, figuring it out as I go. So yeah, like, I think, like, I know how to improve at these problems, because that's something I learned just through gaining other skills in my life. But the solution to these particular problems are definitely things that I'm still in the process of figuring out. So yeah, ask me again in 2 years. I'll tell you how I made it work.
Yeah, I got you, man. 2 years, let's get it. I guess, how's that been for you too? Like, you've talked a lot about how like, language learning has been, like, really rewarding for you in terms of, like, the growth, and you talked briefly about meditation as well. But how has, I guess, learning more about business, like, has it felt really rewarding for you? Has it felt like personal growth outside of, like, your norm?
I mean, for me, it kind of feels like, up until relatively recently, the idea of, like, starting my own business and being completely independent felt completely inaccessible. It felt like, they never teach you about that in school. No one really sits you down and even tells you that this is an option or how to go about doing it. So it kind of just feels like, oh, that's for like, special people, like, not for me. Like, I have no idea how to make that work. And so it's kind of been this process of realizing that, yeah, there's a lot you need to learn, and there's a lot of, it's really hard and takes a lot of time and effort, but it's not really as inaccessible as it might seem at first. Like, there's a lot to learn, but it's a limited amount, and you can learn it all, and it's like, there's a lot of resources available, and ultimately it's doable. So it's really cool to just kind of be going through the shift of realizing, like, oh, I'm actually going to start my own business. Like, I'm actually going to be someone who's independent. I'm not going to have to be employed. Like, I'm going to actually be my own boss. And that's really cool. And especially with the like, because the way that I see it is the skills it takes to run a business are totally transferable, right? Like, that's why you see it's really common for people to have started multiple totally unrelated but successful businesses, because it's like the real skill in running a business isn't like, just knowing exactly what to do to make it work. It's the skill of actually like trying something, getting feedback on it, and then iterating on it. And it's knowing how to go through that gradual improvement process. And so no matter, even if you start off like way off a target, like as long as you know how to go through that iteration process, you can work your way towards creating a product that is going to, assuming that you're starting off with trying to solve a problem that people actually have, then, you're going to be able to work your way to creating a solution to it. And so that's the kind of the coolest thing about this whole situation is that like whatever happens with MIA, even if it's a complete flop and it just like ends up going to shit and like nothing comes out of it, I still will have learned a lot about how to run a business and all these other things. And it will prepare me for whatever I do next. And I mean, even that's why in a way, I'm not scared of failure, because in the grand scheme of things, like failing at your first business is nothing to be ashamed of, right? It's a really common thing. And tons of people who ended up being really successful failed their first business. So it's just like, you have to go through the failure to get to the success. So that's why I feel like no matter what happens, it's all going to be, grist for the mill, and it's going to lead to something good in the future. And that's kind of the coolest thing about this whole situation. And ultimately, yeah, I mean, it's like I never really planned for things to go this way, because when I first started my YouTube channel, it was really just because I didn't know what else to do, because I wasn't ready to go back to school. I had no other ideas for stuff I could do. So I didn't think that this was going to end up becoming like a legitimate business that, I was going to spend years of my life on. It just kind of ended up coming this way. Like, things ended up unfolding this way. And I'm really grateful for it, because now I have this opportunity to like actually start my first business, which is like the hardest thing to do, right? Like that's really the difference between those people who end up, I think, maybe always wanting to become an entrepreneur, but never really like taking the first step, and people who end up really making it work, is just that it's like, will you actually like go through that first process of like trying to do it and going through all the hardships and learning it all as you go and failing at all these different things. And so that's why I feel like it ultimately, like, first of all, it's really cool that I'm like helping people learn languages and like actually providing value to people. That is really cool. But the other really cool thing is like, well, I'm actually like taking my first legitimate step towards being someone who like works for themselves and is independent. And that is really cool. So I honestly just feel so lucky, because I don't feel like I was some guy who like in high school was like, no, I'm going to be different. I'm going to like go read some self-help books, and I'm going to be self-made. Like, I just stumbled into it, got really lucky ultimately. And so, yeah, I'm just really grateful for it.
You also alluded to the difficulties of like the first step into getting into a business, and that in and of itself is a huge topic. And I feel like that's also kind of aided with the idea of all these societal pressures going down on you, like, oh, how come you're not just getting a regular 9-to-5 job? And I'd say the most common of these like pressures is the closest pressure, which is the pressure from your family. What was your family's reaction when you told them, I'm going to be doing YouTube and I'm going to be having my own company as well alongside that?
Well, I mean, it was kind of like a gradual thing,
Mm-hmm.
like at first it was just like, hey, I'm getting like $100 a month for my Patreon. So that's where it started, and it just kind of gradually grew. So, I mean, I think, my parents were happy for me when I first made my Patreon and I was getting some money a month, because it's like, hey, well, you must be doing something if you're actually, getting money and like being put into your bank account every month. And so I think they were happy about that, but probably also a little bit of like, worried, like, well, what is Matt going to do with his life? Because it's like, okay, he left school, like, what is he really going to do? But I also think my parents are kind of like, are pretty, in a way, kind of like next level, on the sense that like, because I mean, they're essentially boomers, but for boomers, they're like have like a really good understanding of like what is going on in the current world. And I kind of get that it's like, I feel like a lot of people's parents are just going to pressure them to like try to get a job, like a normal type of job, like, get on a a tried and true path, or my parents kind of see like the world is going into a place that it's never been in before. So there are no tried and true paths. Like the things that used to be considered tried and true paths aren't necessarily going to be that in the future. And so I think that they, like, in a sense, they, like, my dad kind of had the mindset of like, yep, I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. Like, you know, you're smart. You're ambitious. Like, you're not going to be satisfied with a shitty life. So kind of think he just had that trust. Like, I'm sure you figure it out. And at times I kind of feel like I wish he was a little more hands on, and I wish he would be a little bit more like, help me figure it out. Like, don't just be so hands off. Just let me, like, you know, kind of feels like, you know, I'll just be sitting there struggling and he'll just be like, yeah, I'm sure he'll figure it out, whatever. Like, he's like so like chill about it.
It's like a default response.
Yeah. But ultimately I think like I'm really like, I would way prefer that though than like the traditional type of parent of just like, get a job. Why don't you have a job? What are you doing on the internet? You know, cause, I think, and I think my dad also had the perspective of like, yeah, you're learning a lot. Like you're interacting with people, you're providing a service and getting money in return for that service. You're learning about all the things you're going to deal with everywhere in life, about dealing with people and learning how to, you know, provide to an audience and meet their needs and things like that. So I think he kind of saw that like, I'm having valuable learning experiences. And when I would tell him like, oh, my Patreon passed $1,000 a month, he would be like, I remember like, he was really impressed about that. And then I'm like, oh, past $2,000 a month, he was like really impressed. And then it's like, hey, past $4,000 a month. He's like, whoa, that's crazy. Like people are just sending you money every month. Like, $4,000 or whatever. And so it's like I know he definitely kind of like felt pretty positively towards that. And then like ultimately actually like I was living with my parents have been divorced for a long time, and so I was living with my dad for pretty much ever since I got back from Japan. And for a while I had enough money where I could have been living on my own, but I figured like, well, I mean, I like my dad was more like a roommate than a father in a lot of ways. Like, you know, it was pretty much like the only time we'd talk was when we happened to be like eating dinner at the same time, like unplanned. And, we'd like always just be doing our own thing. And so it was really chill, and the house was super nice because, you know, he makes a lot of money. So like, it was way nicer than whatever apartment I was going to live in. So I was kind of like, hey, I don't like, and why go out of my way to get a shitty apartment and have to pay rent? Like, this is like pretty cool setup. So even though, you know, a lot of people like talk shit about living with their parents, like I was like, hey, I think it's pretty cool. Like, I don't mind it at all. I had no desire to move out. And it was actually like, in around like November last year where my dad decided that he wanted to live on his own. And
Who would have
so
thought?
it was like, yeah. And so like also, so I have two younger brothers, and the older of the two younger brothers was also living with my dad. So it was three of us living in that house. And so he was like, yep. So I'm going to sell my house. So you guys have, like a couple months to like find where you're going to live next. And I mean, he was really supportive and like helping us find our next place or whatever. But he was kind of just like, yeah, I've raised you long enough. Like, you guys are in your 20s. Like, I decided I'm ready to like move on to the next chapter of my life where I don't live with my kids anymore. So, good luck, pretty much. And so, like, you know, that was actually the kikkake. That was the impetus of me moving out and finding my own apartment. And now I live in an apartment with my brother. And in hindsight, it was really good for me. Like, I probably should have moved out sooner, because although it felt like, oh, nothing's going to be different if I live on my own, it does feel different when you are paying all the bills and you are paying for all the groceries. And, you know, like there's a totally different sense of independence and responsibility that I think is just really good. It really like helped me feel way more like an adult. And so I think that was really good for me. I probably should have done it earlier, but I mean, either way, it worked out really well because by the time that I had to move out, I had enough money on Patreon to the point where paying for all my bills was not very difficult. And so, you know, now I'm like, money is not really a concern with me because I at least have enough to pay all my basic bills. And I mean, I'm not really that, you know, I don't really spend that much money on that much stuff. You know, I'm not really that into like eating out all the time or like having expensive clothes or whatever. So it's like for the important things, like, hey, I need a new computer or something. Like for the important things, I have enough money, I can afford those things. And for all the basic expenses, I can afford it. And so, now it's like I think my parents are just pretty proud of me that like, hey, I'm completely financially independent. Just start doing my own completely own thing. Like I just made a new kind of job out of nowhere. And there's enough people who like are getting value of their give me all the money that I need. So now I think they're like really proud of me. And my mom actually has kind of like her own consulting business and is like part of another pretty small, like is like pretty high up in another small business. So she knows a lot about running a business. So she helps me a lot on like some of the like financial and like tax related stuff and things like that. So that's also like, I'm in a really lucky situation overall because of that as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess they're always, really supportive. And, especially now that it's like really taking off, you know?
Mm-hmm. You talked a bit about your Patreon milestones as well. And I feel like there's no bigger milestone than that first dollar. So how did that feel for you when some person that you had no idea like who they were just went and donated you some money? Like how did that feel for you on the inside?
Yeah, it was dope. Yeah. I mean, like I think I uploaded my first YouTube video in like, well, technically, I uploaded the first video on that channel in 2011. Like, right when I first started doing AJAT, I like filmed a video in my room and put it up. But I had been occasionally putting out videos starting from around 2014, 2015. And basically, by that point, I was fluent in Japanese. That was kind of like when I was at University of Oregon. And I felt like I had figured out a lot of things about learning Japanese that weren't on the original AJAT website. So I just naturally wanted to share them with people. So I started making YouTube videos like every couple, I didn't have any sense of obligation at all. It was totally just for fun. It was like whenever I had an idea and I just felt like I wanted to do it, I would go and like make a video. And they were pretty shitty videos. Like it only took like a day to make each video, like half a day. Like when I watch them now, they're like so bad. Like I cringe watching them, especially like I'm using this like potato microphone and I'm like not speaking clearly at all. So it's like really hard to hear what I'm saying. But anyway, like just through making those videos, I built up like a small audience. Like might have had like 300 subscribers or something. It felt like a lot at the time, but you know, like just because I was one of the only people putting out AJAT content on YouTube, like literally. And so, you know, for those few amount of people who were into AJAT, they'd find my channel and they liked my content. And so by the time I made my first Patreon, there was like instantly, I think I surpassed like $100, like on the first day or two. And so I was just lucky how that worked out. And it felt really awesome. Cause at the time I was making no money before that. So it felt like big upgrade. You know, it's just like a couple $100 a month or something. So yeah.
Like, I guess now to the point where you're at and where like MIA and your channel has grown to, how fulfilling does it feel that you're doing something where it's really guided by your passion and not like someone, I guess you mentioned like not wanting to go and work for someone, but like have all that freedom to yourself and put out what you want to put out?
I mean, there are definitely many moments where I do kind of take a step back and I'm like, hey, things are going pretty well. Like, I'm not doing so bad, you know, like, like, you know, just it feels like, hey, I think things are going pretty, I mean, even though there's still like tons of things I struggle with, like I still have tons of personal struggles and like still, like I said, I'm still like not anywhere close to where I want to be when it comes to the just ability to run MIA's business. I'm still like very much in the process of figuring out, but it kind of just feels like, well, things are like on track. Like I'm headed somewhere. And so there are a lot of times where I like, yeah, I'll take a step back and it'll feel really rewarding. And especially like, you know, when I put out a video that I feel like is really good. And then, you know, for the first couple hours, just refreshing every couple seconds to like see the new comments that came and like things like that as, always like pretty fun and fulfilling. And so yeah, there's definitely a lot of times where I feel very positive towards it, but there's also just a lot of times where I just feel like crap, there's so much I have to do. Like, I need to be more productive. Like, oh, there's so much on my plate and I just feel really stressed out and like, I don't have enough time to get to all the things. So it's kind of like, you know, just going back and forth between those two places. I mean, probably spend more time, to be honest, in that place of like, oh crap, I suck. I need to get better. Like I need to up my game. But ultimately I think that's good because that's what grows you, you know? Mm-hmm. So.
I guess another thing on the path of growth is goal setting. And I know you definitely have like a very big goal set in mind, but there's kind of like sub goals to get there, right? So what is, I guess, like the next goal in your mind that you want to hit that you'll feel like, all right, I'm on my way to the next step?
I mean, let's see, like, I mean, almost gonna hit 50K. So there's some like really practical things. I mean, the goal for the YouTube channel in my mind is kind of like 100K, like like I said, I think that would be like really cool to hit that. I mean, right now I'm like focused on making the new version of the site, so I really like want to get that out, and because what I kind of feel now is like there's a real lack of content on the MI website, so it's kind of like, man, I'm getting so much traction with the YouTube videos, but then I send them to the site and there's nothing there on the site, so that always is like, quick, gotta like get on that, and then I think like, yeah, once I get the next version of the site out, and like, I mean, there'll be a while to flesh out the content, but once I like get out the main content of the site and like remake that, then I think hopefully I'll have more time to like really focus on like putting regular time into studying up about running a business and running the financial stuff and the legal stuff, and like, go and like trademark the logo and all these things like that. And so I don't really know if those are goals, but I mean, kind of just in my mind, it's kind of like, okay, I got to do the site so that I can have more time for the legal stuff, and then got to go do that legal stuff. And I mean, I think ultimately it's like, now it feels like in order to get all the stuff that I need to get done, I need to like be working almost like all the time. And like, I'm pretty bad about like stopping at the end of the workday to, go and actually rest, or like taking a day off. And so one of my goals is like get to the point where like get productive enough where I can get everything I need to get done, and then still like be able to actually finish working at like 5 or 6 and actually take a day or 2 off where I'm actually not working the whole day. Whereas now it's like, I just feel like I'm not productive enough to be able to like have both of those things,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that also goes upon like the idea of like strategy, and like strategy is like a big thing, right? But you can kind of split it up into like short-term strategy, like what's going on right now, and then like the long-term strategy. So you kind of mentioned like the long-term strategy and like the short-term strategy for your channel, but with the new MIA website coming up, like what is your long-term vision for the site and how it can help everyone interested in MIA and everyone coming through to from your YouTube channel?
I mean, the goal is to basically have it set up so that like when you could send someone to the site, they have no idea what it's going to be ahead of time, and then they immediately within like a minute or two get what's going on, and they get like, oh, like they that's like kind of how I'm structuring it, and kind of like how kind of like a 3-tier system where, because this is actually like based off of feedback I got from the first version of the site. Like the first version of the site, which I never even ended up completing, was there were going to be stage guides. So there's 5 stages. Each stage has a guide, which is basically like everything you need to know to complete that stage. And it basically was enough content. It might take like 90 minutes to read a stage guide. And in my mind, I thought that was awesome, because it was like, it's one page, one link. It's like, here's how to learn. Here's like the first 6 months to 1 year of your Japanese study on one page with a table of contents at the top. I thought it was perfect, but turns out most people are too intimidated by the length to actually like sit down and read it. So most people don't read it. They like skim parts of it, and then they just try to like Google for questions, and then they like go into the Discord server and ask basic questions, go to Reddit, ask basic questions, and upon on my videos asking basic questions, and so they don't actually read the guide. And so now I'm kind of, and I've like realized from that, and just from getting feedback from other people, like I have to set it up so that the site is kind of like first there's like there has to be some way so you can figure out what is going on, like very quickly. So there has to be like, okay, the first thing you come across is like the just highest level bullet point view of the whole process. So it's like the first thing I'm going to have people see is like, okay, is the roadmap with the 4 stages and like a bullet point list of what each stage is. You could read that in like, 1 minute. And then after that, there's like 1 page for each stage. So it's like, okay, here's what you do in like stage 1 in 1 or 2 pages. Here's what you do in stage 1 or 2 pages. So then like they can read that and get like a better idea. Then there's like a list of like articles that cover like nitty gritty stuff. Like, okay, here's active immersion in stage 1. Like, here's how to make a sentence card. And like that way they can easily, like whatever questions they happen to have or whatever information they happen to want in that moment, they'll be able to find the article just for that. And so that way, like the problem is if you put all the information in 1 page, then they're not going to sift. Most people aren't willing to sift through to find what they want. Instead, they just look elsewhere. So I have to like, hopefully this new structure. And again, I'm sure it won't be perfect. I'm sure there will be unforeseen problems with this one that I will learn once I make it. And then there'll be a new version. But I think this will be at least a big step up from the way it is now in terms of helping people like quickly figure out like, okay, what actually is MI about? What do I actually do? How do I actually get started?
Yeah, because it's always the first step is always action, right? Because otherwise you'll never know. I feel like this is probably like good point. I think it's a good area to wrap it up though, in terms of like we've kind of come across your entire journey. In the beginning, it was Matt, the person from Oregon who wanted to go to Japan, and it was more of like, oh, I studied abroad there, and honestly, like, screw everyone, I'm gonna become the best, like. But you kind of moved past that. You kind of went through your internal struggle where you were like, oh, okay, well, I had this vision of Japan in my mind this entire time when I was like getting to this level of Japanese, but in reality, like, I was thinking about it in a way where it was like really impartial. And then, of course, you end up going on the flip side of that where it was like, oh, but Japan though, like, what have I been doing? But you like moved past that, you grew your YouTube channel, and now you have this entire MIA business but not just by yourself, but I'm really excited to see what's to come for MIA. I just want to say, do you have a message to, I guess, the viewers and listeners in terms of like, I feel like you usually have something that you kind of are like, oh yeah, I'm on a podcast, I'm gonna go say this on the way out. But is there, I guess, more of like I guess, word of advice from all the experiences you've gone through personally, and like nothing really like necessarily to do with Japanese or Japan, but something you felt like personally you've grown and is something that like will help someone, at least one person?
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, like, especially because we were just talking about how, like, the business side of things, where I feel like I'm very much still in the trenches, as you say. Like, when we're talking about the language learning process in particular, I can speak with a certain amount of authority.
Yeah.
But now I've, like, feel my headspace is, like, out of that authoritative place and into the more of, like, the very humble, like, very much just still figure this out place. But, I mean, yeah, like, If you get good at a foreign language, you probably won't regret it. If you're watching this, then I guess most people watch this probably are into learning Japanese, right? So I'd say, I think people who are kind of like coming up now, learning Japanese with immersion methods, like the meta has progressed quite a bit. And so I don't think that very many people I don't even think I need to tell people, like, very few people are probably going to crash and burn as hard as I did, because they're going into this, they're already aware of those potential pitfalls, right? They're aware of, like, hey, if your whole life is completely dedicated to learning Japanese, like, the fact that you decided to do that probably means you got some stuff going on in your psychology. You should probably, like, be looking at that a little bit. And in general, I think it's, like, hard to have too many delusions about Japan, because now, like, it's so common to hear the good and the bad be discussed at this point. So I feel like, yeah, the most important thing, which is, like, be level-headed. Don't be, like, too elitist. Don't fall into that trap of feeling like, you're better than other people because you're really good at Japanese, and that mastering Japanese is going to solve all your problems. Like, I feel like that's the most important thing I would want to say probably to your guys' viewers, but I also feel like I don't even need to say it, because probably, like, just due to how much the meta's progressed, it's like people are already going to know that.
Yeah, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. After, like, spending all this time watching you, it's really inspired me personally. And I think not just me, there's a whole MIA community out there. And I know you're helping at least one, but, like, there's so many people being helped. Eric has actually introduced me to you. It's the whole world growing. It's a whole movement, like you were saying. And I really, really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, especially with how busy I know you are. It's like, really appreciate you taking out the time and giving this long form podcast.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for asking good questions. A lot of questions I've never been asked before, so I didn't have a prepared answer, but I think I was able to do okay.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed our conversation with Matt versus Japan. If this is the first time you're listening to the Koregara podcast, me and my co-host Raza talk about our experiences studying abroad, so we also interview people who have some sort of background in Japan. And if you're interested in Japanese culture or just thinking about moving there, please consider subscribing and listening to more content. We also love talking to you as well, so please consider joining our Discord too and chatting with us. If you want to personally support the podcast, we do have a Patreon, and that would really help us in getting higher quality equipment and maybe even start doing a video portion of the podcast as well. But thank you guys for listening.